Welcome back to Life Groups. Last week we talked about how Abraham was a great example of somebody who battled with their flesh, but also was a great testimony of their love for God. Abraham, though, was not the only one that was that example of that in that family. In fact, Sarah is one that we could take and use as a great illustration of the battle between trying to do God's divine purpose with His divine nature within us, but then also dealing with our flesh. Abraham was given a promise by God that they would be a great nation, and that great nation would multiply and become something great. But unfortunately, Sarah was older, and so was Abraham for that matter. But Sarah was older, and she could never conceive a son. And Sarah struggled with that because she felt like she was the one stopping the promise. So Sarah came up with her own idea, not God's idea, but her idea. And how many times do we do that, where we come up with our own plan? And so Sarah decided with her plan to take her handmaid, Hagar, to give her to Abraham to be his wife, to produce that heir that would be the descendant of that the great nations would be built out of. Now, that wasn't God's plan. That was only Sarah's, and she did it out of her human nature. And the problem is that, yes, Hagar produced a son. And for a while, it seemed good, but unfortunately, Sarah became bitter against Hagar because Hagar was now living out what seemed to be the blessing, but Sarah was not. And so she felt frustrated and bitter and angry towards Hagar. In fact, she was so mean to her that Hagar took the child and ran away. Now, that was never God's plan. Ultimately, God visited Hagar and the child, and they came back. But that was never God's plan. It was always God's plan that Isaac, the son of Sarah and Abraham, would be the descendant that would be the father of other great nations and great people in large number, right? As much as the stars or the sand along the seashore. But yet she did it in her flesh. Now, there was another time where it wasn't just that situation, but where three men, the Lord and two angels, showed up to visit with Abraham. And as they began to talk, the Lord shared to Abraham that this time next year, Sarah would have had conceived a child. Now, Sarah heard this in the tent. She was just at the edge of the tent. She heard what was said, and she literally laughed about it. So the Lord challenged her and said, well, you think that's funny, but I'll get the laughs laughed in this. And sure enough, in time, Sarah conceived Isaac. And when she had Isaac, she made comment about how her household, that right now is a time to celebrate and to laugh, because she knew that she laughed at what God's plan was because it seemed absolutely impossible. Now, you and I want to be people of great faith. We want to be people who can say, well, I believe and God made it so. Have the faith of a grain of mustard seed and a mountain be moved. But what do you do when it seems like time has passed so far beyond you that it never going to happen? And that's where Sarah was. Here she was going to be the mother of great nations, and she was going to do a great thing. But she tried to make it happen her way instead of God's way. And that cost her. It cost her in many different ways, because after Isaac was born, Sarah ended up getting mad again at Hagar and sending Ishmael and Hagar off into the desert. And God worked in that behalf, and He blessed Ishmael because he is the son of Abraham. But she had her flaws, Sarah did. And in those flaws, she revealed her human nature, yet God still wanted to use her. She had a lack of faith. She doubted. She was not a nice person. She was bitter. She was envious and jealous. In fact, she had sometimes I'm guessing, a difficult personality, because Abraham was stuck. What do? I've got a son I got to take care of, but then I have my wife and the son that God promised me, and now there's conflict. What do? God gave him good wisdom, but you could see how that was just a normal household, and there was conflict in it, and yet Sarah was the mother of Isaac, and God blessed her when she was old. We struggle sometimes with our divine nature and the divine purpose God has in our lives, because we think that, well, we've gone too long doing the same thing wrong again and again and again, so how God's going to bless it now? Or we react to things in ways that we shouldn't, and then we think, well, how is God going to use me, because I'm just going to be the same person I've always been? Or how about this? We become jealous and envious, or even try to do God's will our way. And when we do that, we just mess it up. And so we find ourselves in deeper issues than when we started. That's a rough way to go. But yet she was God's chosen woman to bring about the blessing of God on the Jewish nation. You battle these things. I battle these things. The question is, are we willing to keep trusting Him and be faithful to the end? Because if we'll continue to trust Him, then the divine will overcome the flesh if we stay faithful.